The following program is paid for and sponsored by Life Extension Foundation.
Thank you for joining us. Our special today will focus upon the United Nations Security Council resolution condemning Israel. The United States could have vetoed it, but chose to abstain, thereby enabling this controversial UN resolution. The United Nations was established on October the 24th, 1945, after World War II, in order to prevent future horrific conflicts. Despite being the only democracy in the Middle East, Israel is constantly subjected to more criticism and condemnation than any other nation, including countries that systematically kill their own citizens or deny their most basic human rights. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu expressed his concerns, which we'll present shortly, and we'll also be joined by Dershowitz, the world-famous legal scholar and author, regarded as one of the most distinguished defenders of individual rights and the best-known criminal lawyer in the world. And in fact, he is Israel's lead attorney in the court of public opinion. We'll also be joined by Marc Goldman and will proceed following these messages.
To the American people, we're grateful for the support Israel has received over many, many decades. Our alliance is based on shared values, shared interests, a sense of shared destiny, and a partnership that has endured differences of opinions between our two governments over the best way to advance peace and stability in the Middle East. I have no doubt that our alliance will endure the profound disagreement we have had with the Obama administration and will become even stronger in the future. But now I must express my deep disappointment with the speech today of John Kerry. A speech that was almost as unbalanced as the anti-Israel resolution passed at the UN last week. In a speech ostensibly about peace between Israelis and Palestinians, Secretary Kerry paid lip service to the unremitting campaign of terrorism that has been waged by the Palestinians against the Jewish state for nearly a century. What he did was to spend most of his speech blaming Israel for the lack of peace by passionately condemning a policy of enabling Jews to live in their historic homeland and in their eternal capital, Jerusalem. Hundreds of suicide bombings, thousands, tens of thousands of rockets, millions of Israelis in bomb shelters are not throwaway lines in a speech. They are the realities that the people of Israel had to endure because of mistaken policies. Policies that at the time won the thunderous applause of the world. I don't seek applause. I seek the security and peace and prosperity and the future of the Jewish state. The Jewish people have sought their place under the sun for 3,000 years, and we're not about to be swayed by mistaken policies that have caused great, great damage. Israelis do not need to be lectured about the importance of peace by foreign leaders. Israel's hand has been extended in peace to its neighbors from day one, from its very first day. We prayed for peace. We've worked for it every day since then. And thousands of Israeli families have made the ultimate sacrifice to defend our country and advance peace. My family has been one of them. There are many, many others. No one wants peace more than the people of Israel. Israel remains committed to resolving the outstanding differences between us and the Palestinians through direct negotiations. This is how we made peace with Egypt. This is how we made peace with Jordan. It's the only way we'll make peace with the Palestinians. That has always been Israel's policy. That has always been America's policy. Here's what President Obama himself said at the UN in 2011. He said, peace is hard work. Peace will not come through statements and resolutions at the United Nations. If it were that easy, it would have been accomplished by now. That's what President Obama said. And he was right. And until last week, this was repeated over and over again as American policy. Secretary Kerry said that the United States cannot vote against its own policy. But that's exactly what it did at the UN. And that's why Israel opposed last week's Security Council resolution, because it effectively calls the Western Wall occupied Palestinian territory, because it encourages boycotts and sanctions against Israel. That's what it effectively does. And because it reflects a radical shift in U.S. policy towards the Palestinians on final status issues, those issues that we've always agreed, the U.S. and Israel, have to be negotiated directly, face-to-face, without preconditions. That shift happened despite the Palestinians walking away from peace and from peace offers time and time again, despite their refusal to even negotiate peace for the past 8 years, and despite the Palestinian Authority inculcating a culture of hatred towards Israel in an entire generation of young Palestinians. Israel looks forward to working with President-elect Trump and with the American Congress, Democrats and Republicans alike, to mitigate the damage that this resolution has done and ultimately to repeal it. Israel hopes that the outgoing Obama administration will prevent any more damage being done to Israel at the UN in its waning days. I wish I could be comforted by the promise that the U.S. says we will not bring any more resolutions to the UN. That's what they said about this previous resolution. We have it on absolutely incontestable evidence that the United States organized, advanced, and brought this resolution to the United Nations Security Council. We'll share that information with the incoming administration. Some of it is sensitive. It's all true. You saw some of it in the protocol released in an Egyptian paper. There's plenty more. It's the tip of the iceberg. So they say, but we didn't bring it. And they could take John Kerry's speech with the 6 points. Could be raised in the French International Conference a few days from now, and then brought to the UN. So France will bring it, or Sweden, not a noted friend of Israel, could bring it. And the United States could say, well, we can't vote against our own policy. You just enunciated it. I think the United States, if it's true to its word, or at least if it's now true to its word, should now come out and say we will not allow any resolutions, any more resolutions in the Security Council on Israel, period. Not we will bring or not bring, we will not allow any. And stop this game, the charades. I think that the decisions that are vital to Israel's interests and the future of its children, they won't be made through speeches in Washington or votes in the United Nations or conferences in Paris. They'll be made by the government of Israel around the negotiating table, making them on behalf of the one and only Jewish state, a sovereign nation that is the master of its own fate. And one final thought. I personally know the pain, the loss, and the suffering of war. That's why I'm so committed to peace. Because for anyone who's experienced it, as I have, war and terror are horrible. I want young Palestinian children to be educated like our children for peace. But they're not educated for peace. The Palestinian Authority educates them to lionize terrorists and to murder Israelis. My vision is that Israelis and Palestinians both have a future of mutual recognition, of dignity, mutual respect, coexistence. But the Palestinian Authority tells them that they will never accept, and should never accept, the existence of a Jewish state. So I asked you, how can you make peace with someone who rejects your very existence? See, this conflict is not about houses or communities in the West Bank, Judea, Samaria, the Gaza district, or anywhere else. This conflict is and has always been about Israel's very right to exist. That's why my hundreds of calls to sit with President Abbas for peace talks have gone unanswered. That's why my invitation to come to the Knesset was never answered. That's why the Palestinian government continues to pay anyone who murders Israelis a monthly salary. The persistent Palestinian refusal to recognize a Jewish state remains the core of the conflict, and its removal is the key to peace. Palestinian rejection of Israel and support for terror are what the nations of the world should focus on if they truly want to advance peace. And I can only express my regret and say that it's a shame that Secretary Kerry does not see this simple truth. Thank you.
Joining us now from New York is Alan Dershowitz. Alan, it's good to have you back on the show.
Pleasure to be on. Thank you.
Alan, some critics are saying that Israel's reaction to the UN resolution, the criticism and all of that, is unwarranted. What are your thoughts?
It's very warranted. What the UN resolution does is it basically says that the building of the prayer plaza outside of the Kotel, the Western Wall, is illegal in violation of international law, that the building of synagogues in the Jewish quarter is a violation of international law, that allowing students to attend Hebrew University, Arab students, Jewish students, or go to Hadassah Hospital in Mount Scopus is in violation of international law. It would be as if the UN declared the Vatican no longer to be a Catholic capital, or Mecca and Medina no longer to be under the authority of Islam or Saudi Arabia. It goes to the heart and soul of the Jewish character of Israel as the nation state of the Jewish people. So Israel had to react. The UN was wrong as a matter of law and wrong as a matter of fact.
Alan, you were mentioning the legality of Israel and the Jordanians with regard to Jerusalem. Please elaborate on that.
Well, Jewish Jerusalem has always been populated by Jewish people. From the censuses of the early 19th century, Jerusalem always had a Jewish majority. The Jewish quarter of Jerusalem and the area around the Kotel and the access road to Mount Scopus, Hebrew University, and Hadassah Hospital were unlawfully captured by the Jordanians in an aggressive war in 1948. And to now say that they have the right to have that back, even though Israel captured it in a defensive war in 1967, is totally absurd as a matter of law and matter of fact. The UN is simply wrong as a matter of law and fact when it comes to Jerusalem. The issue is somewhat different when it comes to the extreme areas in the West Bank, the settlement expansion. Those are disputed territories. Those have to be negotiated. They certainly don't belong to the Palestinian Authority. They never belonged to the Palestinian Authority. They belong to Jordan and were captured from Jordan in a defensive war. And the issue of whether there should be a Palestinian state on those lands is subject to negotiation. But the UN put its heavy thumb on the scale by essentially saying all that land belongs to the Palestinians, and Israel should start the negotiation from the point of view of not having any land to exchange for peace. That's completely violative of the spirit and the language of Resolution 242 that was enacted in 1967 following the end of the Six-Day War.
What is the significance of this resolution right now in the waning days of the Obama administration?
The significance is that it can't be undone, that the United States made a terrible mistake by not vetoing it. If they had vetoed it, there could still be a resolution, perhaps a resolution that just dealt with the Amona problem or the problem of expansion of settlements in the West Bank. But once a resolution has been passed by the Security Council without a veto, it can't be undone, because to undo it, you would have to get a unanimous vote of the permanent members, which means China and Russia, and they will surely veto any attempt to undo this. So this was a callous and undemocratic attempt, successful attempt, by the Obama administration to tie the hands of the incoming president, which no president should be able to do. The people have voted, and the election results are that there is a new president, and that new president, regardless of who won the election, whether it would have been Hillary Clinton or Donald Trump, should not have had her or his hands tied by the outgoing president, who is a lame duck and who did it when Congress was out of session, over the objection of 88 senators, the vast majority of Congress, the vast majority of the American people, and many within the Obama administration itself. There was a lot of dissent in the White House about this, and I think it will go down in history as one of the dumbest and least productive, counterproductive resolutions of the Security Council.
Some are calling this an actual betrayal of America's ally, Israel.
I think it is a betrayal, and it's a betrayal of many of us who voted for President Obama. He called me into the Oval Office, invited me, sat me down before his second election, wanted my support, and looked me in the eye and said, I have Israel's back. I will never abandon Israel. I think he did. And he did it, I think, for his own selfish reasons. He wanted to put his own legacy before the interests of democracy, the interests of peace, the interests of America, the interests of America's allies. Obama has managed to alienate virtually every one of America's allies in the Middle East. He's alienated Egypt. He's alienated Jordan. He's alienated the Emirates. He's alienated Saudi Arabia. The only countries he seems to be supporting are Iran and maybe the other Shia, Hezbollah, Lebanon, and what he did in Syria was unthinkable, creating a red line and then failing to comply with it, opening up a vacuum for Russia to move in. He will go down in history as one of the worst foreign policy presidents of modern history. And that's coming from a liberal Democrat who voted for him twice and who supports his domestic policies. I think he'll go down in history as a very good domestic president. But in terms of foreign policy, he's done so much harm to peace, to American interests, and to democratic rule around the world.
Alan, you authored the book, A Case for Israel. Do you have plans on writing subsequent books now, following that and other books you've written?
Well, I've written 35 books now, and I'm planning to rewrite The Case for Israel in a new edition, because so much has happened since I wrote it 15 or so years ago. And it has served a very useful purpose in providing information on college campuses and elsewhere for people who try to defend Israel. And so I want to make sure that there is a current version of the new case for Israel, which I hope I'll be able to publish within the next year. I'm also working on a memoir called Why I Left the Left But Couldn't Join the Right. The dilemmas faced by liberal Democrats like me who support a woman's right to choose, gay marriage, gun control, separation of church and state, a liberal Supreme Court, but cannot support the direction in which the Democratic Party seems to be moving. And particularly if Keith Ellison is named to be the chairman of the DNC, the Democratic National Committee, that will drive away many liberal Jews who will not want to be in a party that has as its chairperson a man who was so close to Farrakhan and who didn't, quote, recognize that he was an anti-Semite for so many years when Keith Ellison was literally at his side. So I think we're seeing a major rethinking of why so many Jews have supported the Democratic Party over the years. The Jews aren't leaving the Democratic Party. It's the Democratic Party that seems to be leaving the Jews and supporters of Israel. I'm going to fight to keep the Democratic Party both liberal and supportive of Israel, but it's a fight that's getting more and more difficult.
Mr. Dershowitz, a real pleasure having you back on the show.
My pleasure. Thank you, and keep doing great things.
Thank you, sir.
Sure. Be well. Thank you.
The term Arab East Jerusalem is not historically accurate. We have thousands of years of history of a single undivided city. Look back through all the various chapters in Jerusalem's past, and you will not find a time when Jerusalem was divided into East and West prior to the war with Jordan. We have archaeology, historical accounts, records that prove over 3,000 years of undivided Jewish existence here in Jerusalem. You can go to archaeological digs and find evidence of over 3,000 years of Jewish life. You can find places in the areas that are today called Arab East Jerusalem, where King David lived. The wall behind me is a part of the palace that King David lived in, and yet even the very existence of King David is today being questioned. The fact is, the division of Jerusalem into East and West only began in 1948 with the invasion of the Jordanian army, who erected walls here of concrete, barbed wire, and put in minefields. This division only lasted 19 years. We have eyewitness testimony from those whose families lived for generations in what is called Arab East Jerusalem, and who were expelled from their homes by the Jordanian army.
I was born in 1942 in Old Jerusalem. We were like 8 generations at that time.
I live in the old city. I am 6th generation of Arav Eliezer Bergman, who came to this place on the year 1835. We were evacuated from here, from the old city, with nothing. We only the clothes we wore. We had for many days, we had nothing. Our homes were left here with all the furniture, all our possessions. When we left the old city, we were refugees. The world knows about the Arab refugees of 1948. There were also Jewish refugees, and I was one of them.
The last day of the war, which was ceasefire, my grandfather brought the last water, and the Arab already were on top of the roof of the synagogue, and they killed him.
In 1967, the Jordanians fled, Jerusalem was reunited, and the walls torn down. Jews could once again return to their holiest places. Far from creating a new situation of occupation, the war re-established a status quo of an undivided city. Today, few people even know where the dividing line was. Thousands of Jews and Arabs cross the old dividing line every day without even realizing it. Jerusalem is a unified city, despite what the media would have you believe. Yet, with references to East Jerusalem as a separate geographical area, the media are supporting a historically inaccurate myth that undermines the legitimate Israeli claims that are backed by thousands of years of history.
With us again is Marc Goldman. Pleasure to have you back on the show.
Thank you. Thanks for inviting me, Richard. Appreciate it. Pleasure.
We can't ignore things that are occurring, and there is the situation right now, a rather historic event, which is the anti-Israel resolution at the UN. And Prime Minister Netanyahu has expressed dismay. What are your thoughts with regard to this video we just saw with the Prime Minister?
Well, I would say it's not just an anti-Israel resolution, it's an anti-democracy, pro-terror resolution.
The timing is odd. The administration is about to leave office, the current one, and...
To me, the timing is not odd because Obama has been having so many people act as though he has been a supporter of Israel, but clearly now his true colors are coming out, and he's looking to do, I think it's clear and apparent, as much damage as he possibly can before he leaves. I think ultimately Israel will be stronger for it. Israel will stand up for itself as it knows it has to do. And all the people of Israel will be united, recognizing that this is the Jewish homeland, that God has given us thousands and thousands of years ago, and it's ours forever.
So many people oppose Israel's position and are in support of what so many others are actually aggressively pursuing.
Well, it just is an indication of how self-delusional people are willing to be, and will rationalize any decision that they choose to make for whatever their motivations are. But it's interesting to look at the word rationalize, because really it's comprised of two words. It means rational lies. And so clearly these people are willing to ignore history, pretend something is not the way it is. It's ridiculous, and we have to stand up for the fact that the truth ultimately will prevail.
Mark, some people argue that if Israel was in a position to give more land for peace, it would not bring peace any closer, and they use Gaza as an example. All these greenhouses that were constructed, and then the settlements there in what historically many people argue is part of Israel. And the next day, basically, all these state-of-the-art greenhouses were trashed, scrapped for metal, could have fed half of the Middle East with it.
The Arabs have been, and the Muslims have been clear about their objective. Their objective is no Israel. It's not that Israel can be this big or anything else. As far as they're concerned, Israel shouldn't exist in their area of the world. As for that matter, they feel that way about Europe and the United States and everything else. If it's not a Muslim thing, then it's not good enough.
What are your thoughts with regard to those Jewish people and others in the United States who have far more liberal views than yours, if I may say so?
I think it's clear that Israel has made any number of efforts over the years, most recent being giving back Gaza, but all the offers of, all the space that the Arabs have said, the Muslims have said is their part, and they were offered it and they rejected it because fundamentally they want no Israel. Their charter says it, their behavior is clear and obvious that is their objective.
Before we conclude,
Yes.
Share with our audience your hopes for the future in this great country.
I think that this country has been really saved. I think God has looked with favor on us, and I'm very hopeful for what's going to happen now, that we're going to become much more self-sufficient. I think Donald Trump is going to do what he has to do. I'm encouraged by the people he's put around him, and it's going to make America great again.
My personal thoughts are, as with the Obama administration 8 years ago, my thought was we should all give everyone the benefit of the doubt and see what happens and hope for the best. And I hope everyone will do the same with Trump coming in. Thank you so very much.
Me too. My pleasure. Thank you, Richard. Thank you very much.